I don't know about you, but for much of my adult life, I spent a lot of time thinking about how one day I'd be able to do all those things that I saw grown-ups doing without worrying or without being afraid. I thought one day I'll be like that. So I realised that I was approaching my 50th birthday and that things hadn't really substantially changed. I think they definitely moved and inched on, but they hadn't substantially changed. And I realised that I was going to have to take some steps. And I guess for me, what I ended up doing was going back, I suppose, to the Bible and seeing what it said. And I couldn't find anywhere in the Bible that told me that you had to wait till you were 50 or 60 to crack on and be mature in the things of God. In fact, the Bible told me the exact opposite, that actually God could use anyone and that age wasn't significant. So I guess at that point I really began a journey which I just wanted to kind of recount to you, because it might be something you relate to, it may not be. You may be happy with where you're at on the journey, and that's absolutely fine. But I just really wanted to think about how I've reached that point of now just embracing what life brings and not being fearful and not feeling that somehow I'd come into the fullness of who I was meant to be, but that wasn't there yet. So I've done some thinking about what it is or what it was that gave the groundwork for me moving forward on this. And I think one of the things when I look back, when the children were quite young, and I think my youngest had just started going to school, so that's probably 20 years ago, I spent a lot of time investing in myself. By that I mean I would spend at least an hour a day, because I really love reading stories or books by other Christians of just things and seeing what God had done, and then reading other books about understanding who we were in Christ, some really fundamental things. And as I say, I went back to the Bible and there were loads of promises there for me that God would be with me if I stepped out and went for it, and just put my trust in Him. I think a lot of the time I've been putting my trust in myself. One of the things that really crippled me most was being fearful of what people thought. And I knew I needed to get over that, but it was important to me. I think, it wasn't important, but I just couldn't get past it, I guess. What people thought, and worse, what people were saying behind my back. Does that worry you, what people say behind my back? I think it's a normal thing. But I think it cripples us from the life we're meant to be living. And I think a pivotal time for me was actually the really traumatic experience of going through a divorce. At that point, you do find out what people think of you. But also, the only one that you can trust at that point really is God. And He's the rock, and He's the one that, I certainly chose to cling to at that point. So that really set me up for caring less about what people thought, and also realising that the worst had already happened. Because sometimes people say, what's the worst can happen if you do that? The things that you want to do, you're bound and you don't think you ought to do. But what's the worst thing can happen? Well, the worst had already happened to me, and God had brought me through it. And so that really helped me move forward. But I think at the end of the day, it was a decision that if it's not now, then when? And it wasn't an instant thing, but it was a really conscious thing that if I'm going to live my life, it's going to start now, and I'm going to live it the way I feel I should be living it, and I'm not going to hold back because of fear. And my journey didn't finish, it continues. So I looked at the lives of the different women in the Bible, and I really wanted to get underneath their skin to realise that this was real lives that we were talking about, real challenges, and to see how they dealt with it and how God impacted that. And I learnt a lot from them. And what I saw looking at these people, these real people that the stories in the Bible tell us about, is that they were just regular people. They were people with failings, some people with really big failings, with huge challenges, and yet God chose to use them. And that confidence that God could overcome their weakness and their foolishness and their stupidity, to be honest, really encouraged me, because I thought, if he can do that for them, he can do it for me. And I realised, you're not going to like this, but I'm going to tell it you anyway. And I realised it was probably quite arrogant of me to think that my stupidity was somehow bigger than God's enormousness. And looking at the Bible, and the stories of people there and the stories of people since, I knew that he could take ordinary women and change them into something amazing for him. And so I'm just on the first steps of that journey, but I'm going for it, and I make mistakes all the time, but I wouldn't have it any other way, because I don't want to get to the end of my life and have regrets about not living fully the life that I feel God's called me to live. And I think one of the things that has challenged me most is Peter, because he stepped out onto the water. Nobody'd ever done what Peter did, walk on water like that. I'd really like to encourage you today. If God was with you today, and if you are a follower of his, he is, what would you do differently today? What might you step out and say differently today? What might you do differently today? What might you think differently today? And how might you progress that journey? Whether it's, for me, it can be spending time in worship, just thinking about how amazing he is. Whether it's reading to discover who this amazing Father of yours is, so that you're aware of his bigness more than you're aware of your smallness. What can you do today to help you on your journey as well? Have a great day.